Hello everyone, this is Ryan the Achner, and this is your show, The Art Show. Today we're gonna start with our first part, which is gonna be about classical antiquity. We're gonna divide this into two. We're gonna start with archaic, geometric and archaic Greece, and then we're gonna get back to classical and Hellenistic Greece. And at first, we're gonna talk about classical antiquity as a whole. Classical antiquity really starts in 800 BC with the earliest records of Homer's epic poetry. And then it moves forward into the fall of the Roman Empire in 111 AD. And classical culture really ends in the beginning of the Middle Ages in 600 AD. Today, we're going to talk about the first part of classical antiquity, which is going to be archaic Greece. Archaic Greece starts, as I said, from 800 BC and goes to 449 BC, or the Greco-Persian Wars. And before this, we look at Greek history and we see the Dark Greek Ages, where it begins with the Dark Ages before 800 BC and the period of Orientalizing. And then we get to the Geometric period. And in the Geometric period, we see that pottery and sculpture started to kind of evolve, but it was not naturalistic. Naturalism was very lacking at the time. And we look at this spot in the Met from the Geometric period, and it depicts a funerary scene, and we see that the people, their torsos are reduced into triangles, and we see to the left the three horses, but they are only distinguishable by their 3 heads and 6 legs, but we cannot see any sense of depth, any sense of perspective in them. Moving from geometric pottery, we get to archaic pottery, and we look at this spot in the black figure technique. In this technique, we employ a layer of slip, and then the layer of slip is chipped away to reveal details. And then even red ochre is added in the beard and in the clothing. And then even if we have women, we add a white layer of clay. And when all this is fired in a certain technique with controlled levels of oxygen, we get the glazed final pot. When we look at this spot, we see that it depicts Achilles and Ajax playing a board game. We have no literary record of this scene, but all we know is Achilles and Ajax are in the Trojan Wars, and Achilles eventually will die, and Ajax will go trying to find Achilles' armor and ends up killing himself. But among all the turmoil of war and all this violent context, we see this spot and we see Achilles and Ajax playing a simple, relaxed board game. And we see in the text bubbles above, we see Achilles saying, "I have 4," and Ajax saying, "I have 3," and thus Achilles won the game. As I said, this spot is by one of the most famous potters in Greek history. His name is Ezekiel, and it's signed by him to show that pottery at the time was a very refined form of art, unlike its utilitarian use that will show in the later periods. And then from pottery, we go to sculpture, and we look at the chorus, and we see the linearity in the sculpture, and we see the Egyptian influence on it, in the sense that when we look at it from the side, we see that one leg is moving forward and one leg is backwards, and this is very reminiscent of Egyptian sculpture. But what is the biggest difference between the two? It's that Egyptian sculpture is done in high relief, meaning that Egyptian sculpture that we see on the right is still attached to the stone that it was carved from. And thus, the center of gravity and the weight of the sculpture is all on the hind leg. But in archaic sculpture, in this chorus, we see that the body is detached from the stone and the sculpture is free standing, and the center of gravity is in between the legs, giving it strong stability. And then we look at it and we look at the beautiful big eyes. and we look at the hair. And the hair is in this archaic pattern that we see all over the archaic period. And then we go down and look at the abdomen and the torso. And the abdomen and the torso and all their details are done in strict geometric lines, showing an interest in naturalism. But the techniques and the understanding of the human body hasn't been properly developed yet. And we look at the back and we see all the details in the back of the sculpture. We look at the elbows, and the elbows are reduced into V shapes or triangles, and even the detail of the back muscles, it's all done in strict, straight lines. And one thing that we notice about it is that it's 100% nude. And to understand the context of it, we see these kind of choruses in either to honor gods, such as Apollo, or as funerary marks for young dead kids. And as I said, the sculpture is 100% nude. That is totally contrary to the chore, or the male or the female figure. We look at the female figure and see how the pose is in a way that she's going to offer an offering to the gods, clearly to Athena, since these courses and chore were found in Athens. We look at this chore and see that they're fully clothed and adorned with jewelry and even crowns. And all of this to show that the archaic Greek women didn't really have the liberties that she would later on have in the classical and in the Hellenistic period. And we also see that it's painted in very rich colors, very rich pigments of reds and blues and yellows. And this goes contrary to the belief that Greek sculpture was white plain marble, and actually it was painted with all kinds of beautiful colors. And this even translates to the misconception that classical architecture is all white plain marble, when it's actually painted, as we see in the ruins of Knossos, where the columns are painted in reds and blacks. And later on in the archaic period, or in the late archaic, we see that naturalism was more portrayed, and we look at these sculptures from a pediment of a temple, and we see how the human body is twisted, and we look at the poses, and we see that the characters here are removing spears and swords out of their bodies. But one thing that is very weird and disturbing about these scenes is that they're smiling, and it's very weird. And we see that archaic sculpture has this archaic smile that we see despite of the context, whether it's violent, whether it's sad. And this was not done because the characters were badass and they were smiling, but it was only done because the sculptors didn't really know how to sculpt the lines of the lips. And thus, they ended up with this archaic smile. And on the late archaic, we're going to finish today's episode, and we're going to explore in the next episode the Hellenistic and the classical period. This is the end of the first episode of the art show. Don't forget to like it and subscribe and even share these videos. I am looking forward to all the feedback you would give me in the comments below. If you have any questions or suggestions, you can DM me at my account, The Art Nerd. I will attach it below. Thank you so much, and see you all in the next episode. Have a good one.